Good afternoon, folks. We're going to get started in just a few minutes. Hi, all. Thanks for tuning in. We're going to get started in just a few minutes. Afternoon, everyone. We're going to give it one more minute and jump into the presentation today. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. My name is Guillermo Gomez. I'm Program Director at the Urban Design Forum. We're delighted to be partnering today with the Downtown Brooklyn Partnership today to launch the Downtown Brooklyn Public Realm Action Plan. In case you're new to the Urban Design Forum, we are an independent membership organization that mobilizes civic leaders to confront defining issues in the built environment. We empower professionals of diverse backgrounds, industries, and perspectives to shape a better future for all New Yorkers. We investigate complex challenges in the built environment, study alternative approaches from cities around the world, and advance progressive strategies to build a more democratic city. A big thanks for the continuing support of our fellows, our board of directors, and our director circle. So today's presentation is part of our new Streets Ahead series. Over the next year, the forum is exploring ways in which New York City can boldly transform city streets to create connected communities. When COVID-19 hit last year, we saw how streets became sites to socialize, dine, exercise, and play. City government responded nimbly to the crisis by piloting open streets programs, enabling restaurants, businesses, and people to reclaim street space from vehicles. As vaccination rates pick up, while our subway trains and our social calendars fill up, the forum wants to start thinking about ways we can make these new uses permanent. So over the coming months, we're organizing nearly 50 Urban Design Forum Fellows to dream up new visions for our streets, working across the lenses of climate, care, commerce, culture, and continuity, 1 year and 8 years ahead. We're so excited to share new visions and ideas for New Yorkers and work with the next administration to shape more people-centered streets. As we organize case studies and render new possibilities, we want to hear from you. That's the folks in the audience. What people-centered streets should we be looking at? Who should we be speaking to next, both in New York City and abroad? So feel free to plug in your thoughts into the chat today. Today, we're really excited to organize the first public unveiling and conversation of the Downtown Brooklyn Public Realm Action Plan. We've all seen downtown Brooklyn skyline rising in the distance, welcoming enormous transformation over the past decade. New residences flocked to the neighborhood, new Class A office spaces are also coming online. And while Manhattan's commercial corridors shuttered during the height of the pandemic, downtown Brooklyn, like most of our city's outer boroughs, saw active streets and foot traffic. The neighborhood is blessed with incredible public transit, and numerous universities and cultural institutions are located in and around the area, inviting a mix of users and visitors to the public realm. But as we've seen across the city, the pandemic has highlighted the dire need for more open space. And of course, recent climate events have also highlighted the dire need for green infrastructure to keep our residents safe and businesses afloat. So today's event will be dedicated to reimagining who our streets serve. We're delighted to have Regina Meyer from the Downtown Brooklyn Partnership, Kai Bergman from Bjarke Ingels Group, and Claire Weiss from WXY to share recent public realm investments and activations and new visions for shaping more people-centered streets. After the presentation, I'll ask a few questions before I welcome our invited respondents to share their thoughts on ways to carry out this plan forward in the coming months and years to come. So let's get started. If I can welcome Regina, Kai, and Claire to join me on screen, please. So let me quickly introduce our three incredible speakers, and I'll pass the reins to you three. Regina Meyer is the president of the Downtown Brooklyn Partnership, a not-for-profit local development corporation that supports the area's emergence as a center for innovation, creativity, and entrepreneurship. Regina previously served as president of Brooklyn Bridge Park and senior vice president of planning and design at the Hudson Yards Development Corporation. We also have Kai Bergman, who is partner at Bjarke Ingels Group, who brings his expertise to proposals around the globe. Kai heads BIG's business development, which currently has offices in over 20 different countries, as well as overseeing BIG's communications. Kai most recently contributed to the Dry Line to protect 10 miles of Manhattan's coastline. And we have Claire Weiss, who is the founding principal of WXY Architecture and Urban Design. WXY is globally recognized for its place-based approach to architecture, urban design, and planning, and has played a vital role in design thinking around resiliency. Claire was also awarded the Medal of Honor from AIA in New York, and by Architectural Record for Women in Architecture as an innovator. I want to thank the three of you for joining us today. We're really excited and privileged to have you three join us to share your vision for downtown Brooklyn. I'll pass the mic to you all now.
Hi, I'm Regina Meyer. I'm president of the Downtown Brooklyn Partnership, and I'm thrilled to be here this afternoon. And first off, want to thank everybody at the Urban Design Forum, staff and fellows, for supporting our work in downtown Brooklyn. It's been really great to be a part of the citywide dialogue on what's important and as we move toward the future in New York City. Also, just for those of you who don't know, the Downtown Brooklyn Partnership is the leading business advocacy group in downtown Brooklyn. We are made up of 3 business improvement districts, as well as other property owners, cultural groups, and colleges in the downtown area, all striving to grow a better downtown and work in present time on that. I'm really, really pleased to be able to present our plan for the future in the public realm, along with Claire Weiss and Kai Bergman. Just by way of background, we were fortunate enough to retain WXY and BIG several years ago to start thinking about streetscape in downtown Brooklyn, and so pleased that they're here today with me. So let's go to the first slide. Martha. I love to start with this slide. This is an actual rendering of the downtown Brooklyn skyline as incorporate some of the buildings that are both that have already been built and those who that are underway. And I think this demonstrates to all of us right off the bat that downtown Brooklyn has, over the past 15 years, past decade, has grown into a major center, a major mixed-use district for the city of New York. And I'm so proud that since the rezoning, which I had the opportunity to lead at city planning years ago, has really shown the incredible strength of downtown Brooklyn and its incredible connectivity to the rest of its adjoining neighborhoods. And that really, to me, go to the next slide, Martha, is represented by what's happened over the past 15 years. We've seen a tremendous growth in new residences, new businesses, more workers, strength in our colleges and university, and in our startups and entrepreneurs. And what's really exciting about that, going to the next slide, is that we know that the district has experienced significant growth based on the great strengths of what we had in downtown Brooklyn. And we already had a great shopping street, we had a great civic center, we had office at MetroTech. But what we've seen over the past decade, especially as New York City has continued to evolve, is that people love coming down here. They've marched with their feet. They're moving into downtown Brooklyn. They're making investments in downtown Brooklyn and bringing new jobs, all because of the great assets of our fantastic transit system and our fantastic location. So the next slide really points to why at this time did we think, after all this growth, was it important to really focus on streetscape and public realm. And I think when you look back at downtown Brooklyn, most of us who know the area know that downtown Brooklyn is actually a mashup of different areas in terms of both streetscape and grid. And because of that, there had been a really lack of attention on our street by street, block by block neighborhood. We have found that over the course of the development of MetroTech and the rezoning in the early 2000s, the city really was able to focus on movement across Flatbush Avenue and Adams Street going toward the bridges, but didn't really focus on the neighborhood. And the neighborhood was in transition, honestly. But now it really is the time. And so we really think that how we can tackle challenges is by tackling issues such as the lack of open space. We find multimodal conflict and congestion due to older bus system and an older parking system, narrow and substandard sidewalks that haven't been looked at since the post-war era, really, and street grids that really disorient newcomers. So what we'd like to do is go to the next slide. We're putting forth an action plan that significantly changes the street by street experience in the core of downtown Brooklyn. We're doing that by employing a number of methods that really are not new to what's been going on in New York City and globally on improving public realm, but concentrating all of these efforts in one location for the most powerful impact. And so you can see from this rendering, we really have looked at virtually every block face in our district, moving from the Court Street Cadman area in the west, on the left of the slide, over to Flatbush Avenue and the Cultural District on the east side, down to 4th Avenue and Atlantic Center. And so the next slide emphasizes what our goals are for the core. What we're really looking for is taking our infrastructure improvements and making sure that they have the highest impact for all of our residents, visitors, guests, Use the shared street network and all the great thinking that New York City has been doing, especially along Broadway in Manhattan, and really focus that on the core of Manhattan. Increase biodiversity, really green the district. And this is a hard challenge given the huge amount of infrastructure underground, and really do something bold in downtown Brooklyn. Certainly our skyline is now bold. Now it's time for our public realm to be as bold. And then the next slide is our key recommendations. And what we are recommending here is that we have a complete shared street system for the core of downtown Brooklyn. And you'll see this in detail. Focus also on the Adams Street Capital Project. And this is really an incredible timing for us to think about Adams Street, as the city has just implemented a new bikeway on the Brooklyn Bridge to phenomenal success in its early weeks. This is something that just has happened. We're looking to develop a new downtown Brooklyn standards tree pit and planters. You'll learn more about that. And happily, I'm proud to say that we've gotten a lot of early success and approval from both the city and the development community to move forward with that. Looking at Fulton and Livingston Street to upgrade the bus network in a way that really updates usership and also different modes. And then finally, focusing on the redesign of Columbus Park and Cadman and University Place as locations that the Parks Department has in the district that really have phenomenal potential. So with that, I'm going to turn the slides over to Claire Weiss.
Great. Thanks, Regina. What everyone probably, if we go to the next slide, because I think that what you all are seeing is actually a pretty, we call it an action plan for a reason. And I wanted to say that one of the really fun things about collaborating with BIG was trying to do a kind of, a contemporary version of how do you accomplish all of this. And so I think what Regina outlined are things that are incremental and things that are specific projects all at the same time that are really kind of a public-private initiative. And so when I go through the themes, I'm going to do the first two, and then Kai's going to take over. Really, the themes are weaved through both those things like tree pits and greening, and through things like changing the mobility. So if we go to the next one. So I'm going to go through the infrastructure for people theme, which is the core of everything, which is if we can't make more room, then it's going to be really hard to plant all those trees. And so if you look at the slide to the left, you can see that Brooklyn is full of cyclists, and you know how popular, look at the Brooklyn Bridge now, Flushing, but there's a huge gap, and that has caused a lot of casualties and confusion in the streets. So one of the core things is to link that gap, and looking at both. Obviously, you get off the Brooklyn Bridge today, there's now a dedicated bike lane, but how do you actually link across and down? So you can see a protected bike lane, and then a new westbound bike lane, and again, on Schermerhorn, a new eastbound. And how do you accomplish that? Next slide. Really by looking at the bus network. So the sort of infrastructure for people starts in making downtown Brooklyn the most walkable place ever. And then so to do that, you start with walking, increasing the sidewalk, bikes, and now buses all working together. And so I think the key kind of discovery here was that if you could make a bit more room by creating, instead of buses two ways on Fulton Street, you could, and looping with Livingston, you could create a system that gives you some space for the bike lane I just spoke about. Next slide. And then now we're back to the walkable part. So clearly Willoughby Street today is a shared street, one of the first in the city. But the ambition here is to create an entire district of shared streets, so that the shared street really evolves from where we're seeing it today in where we started with essentially temporary work into a kind of permanent shared street district for downtown Brooklyn. So you look at all the red, right? And you have all of these streets that aren't necessarily continuous. They're the wonderful grids coming together, the solution, and actually the potential for really great streets is a shared street network. Next. Thanks, Martha. And so ultimately, that's how you get a greener and eventually bolder, right, Kai, Brooklyn, is by having more curb and reshaping the curb and reshaping the mobility to create what you have on the right, which is 1,000 new trees minimum, 4 miles of new planting, and thus really this 230% of permeability. So going to the last one on this section. So I think I hand off on Bold Brooklyn, don't I, Kai? Oh,
Yes. So thanks, Claire. And, I think it's another sign also of kind of Regina and the downtown Brooklyn's leadership in actually having two designers, both WXY and Big, actually come to this and look at this issue over the last 2.5 years, because we had to resolve things kind of together. And again, then a lot more voices are actually being considered and sort of being, and perspective being looked at. And as we kind of interweave the ideas of infrastructure for people, and we also integrate a sort of more space for not only the people, but then also the trees and the biodiversity and the plantings, that is what provides you a kind of new public realm that is as bold as the skyline above. Next. And in the infrastructure for people, next.
maybe I got it wrong, Kai, and I wasn't supposed to switch off.
It's fine if you'd like to go. I can also keep going.
Yeah, let me go on this and I'll hand you off because I guess I reviewed it. But anyways,
Yes.
I think I reviewed this and
Okay.
you can kind of see it zoomed in how this loop is working. So let's clip through so that Kai can actually get to some other stuff. Yeah, so I wanted to talk actually about this rendering because I think it got everything from where it all started, the Brooklyn Strand, to again, as Kai was talking about, a kind of collaboration on how do you start making a real impact on the parks? And the fact that Adams Street is super wide and it's really from that Civic Center Robert Moses legacy of it being all about the car. I mean, it's an unbelievable amount of roadbed. And really, although Tillery is now done, and I think, it's got that great Hank Willis Thomas sculpture there, you can only imagine from seeing Tillery, what it's really needed is a true kind of regreening and creating a new infrastructure for people from Adams to Borum. And next. Yeah, so I think this is getting close to my last slide, but when I spoke about the opportunity for Fulton Mall, which really to have a bike lane on it, to look at the buses, you can really see this in this rendering, and you can see what Kai is going to talk about, which is reshaping of curbs and tree pits into this sort of creating pockets for people, but also creating more space for trees. When you think about kind of the round tree pits and combining them together, you get these aviator shapes. And so this idea of reshaping the standard DOT tree pit into a tree pit for Brooklyn that actually increases the permeability, I think was a core goal on the project and is actually really infrastructure for people. Next. Yeah, I think that gonna hand this off, Kai, to you now.
Okay, thanks, Claire. So, by shared street network next, we're of course speaking about the different modes of transportation, pedestrian, bicycles, e-scooters, buses, and cars, and how we can actually start to weave these different modes, different speeds of movement together, and to create really streets that we've also noticed in the open street period can actually do a lot more than just a single task. Next. And I think here we're looking for ways that we can start to inform the navigation and also assist in creating a safer space by looking at sort of paving patterns, the planters and where they're placed, seating where people will then also be creating a sort of visual confirmation that this is a different type of space than in the rest of the city. And then to sort of also emphasize these zones through both, the support of programming as well as visual art, and that you can start to really view the public realm as that canvas that allows for a different type of experience in the downtown Brooklyn area. Next. And so by creating kind of a toolkit that allows for one to start thinking, you can start to work with both the private and public sectors, the universities that are sort of legacy owners, and start to sort of really talk about how one can weave different interests together to really create a space that people can identify with as they're moving across the city from Cadman Plaza to say the Barclays Center, and that you really sort of start to feel that you're really in a place that is protective, that is thinking of you walking and getting through that part of the city through different means. Next. And looking at that sort of personal, humanized scale at the street, looking for the different types of activities that one can have, thinking of the different ages that are moving through that part of the city as well. And I think just as the rezoning really was emphasizing how to bring, a vibrancy in development and also looking at different uses, I think that the action plan now is actually that this rezoning has had a profound success, and that in that success, that sort of leads to this opportunity to sort of rethink and sort of reconfigure the public space. Next. And you have a lot of different sizes of streets that was, from say, little alleyways. There's also, you sometimes have the back of a building. Sometimes you're, in a sort of wider street where there's also a little bit more traffic. So it's navigating all of those different needs and ensuring that, people respect one another, create, movement across the sidewalks so that that's also emphasized. But then using the paving patterns and the planters and the seating to sort of allow for people to really take notice of what the options are, and the 1,000 trees that we're also adding and creating that sort of more biodiversity within the downtown core is something that you're really going to also notice significantly as it happens. Next. And next. So you can see here that you've got these wonderful neighborhoods that butt up against downtown Brooklyn that are more residential and have sort of leafy streets. And here, really, the intent is to be. It's almost you have to be quite surgical, almost like a chiropractor, that finds the space where both the plantings and the trees can go, just because of the below grade infrastructure, the subways and everything else that you have to sort of accommodate. But we really sort of mapped out where those little points of greening were possible. And then again, emphasizing certain routes and making the sort of movement also off of the Brooklyn Bridge down Adams and then across and further south, making some of those spaces a lot more pleasant than they are today. Next. Again, what the action plan does is create different toolkits that then both the planners, the developers that will be asked to sort of make improvements along the sidewalks. 11 Hoyt is a great example, a recent building that was then open to the idea as the action plan was actually being finalized, that would be sort of the first test bed project where we could try out a lot of these different ideas. And the greening here is both put into planters and taken sort of as edge treatment to the sidewalk, but it also could be something that actually is then integrated into those back wall situations and actually move up the wall of a given project. Next. And we're looking to really widen the sidewalks. The success of the rezoning has brought a lot more people living in downtown Brooklyn as well as working. So you have movement through the city at lunchtime. You have people moving to and from work, commuting, walking through the city, through downtown Brooklyn. And so that foot traffic really, as you sort of analyze where people are walking and as the trash and the garbage also comes out of the buildings and how that is taken care of, it's really to allow for those different needs to take place. And next. And here you can see the sort of phasing of how these ideas can be implemented in stages. So we realize that there are a lot of different, participants, stakeholders, owners of these spaces. So we have to sort of also consider how one could move into with the city into a mode of actually providing a staged effort where you start to increase the biodiversity in both the plantings and the trees. You can start to think of that as something that's slightly temporal, that becomes more permanent. You begin to sort of take the sort of right angles and soften them a little bit, again, to find ways for both the traffic that's moving through the city as well as the pedestrians that are looking to actually get more space to coexist. And that's really also at the foot of the shared street concept where you're trying to really make it a space that accommodates a lot more uses than it does today. Next. And here's a view of actually the work that we're doing sort of in phase one. Next. And finding sort of prototype projects. So this is the 11 Hoyt, where you can start to see how we're sort of allowing for there's the old existing sidewalk or the sidewalks that are just being sort of poured in place. And then those areas that extend into the current street, and making sure that, people start to see this sort of toolkit that they can then start to actually implement in projects all along the downtown Brooklyn corridors. Next. The planting beds are being enlarged. More trees are being planted than were probably initially envisioned. should be a few more slides. There we go.
Yeah, there's the whole Bull Brooklyn still too.
Yeah, exactly. So, and then, you know, you come to Albee Square, 9 DeKalb, again, an area that has always been pretty important and significant, but has even grown more so with City Point and the different projects that are going up. And you can imagine more and more people coming and living downtown will be spending more time in these areas. So it's really to start looking at and analyzing the current uses where there also may be less traffic than was envisioned 10, 15 years ago, and finding a way to sort of transform those spaces into the action plan. Next. This is looking down towards Albee Square in the distance and moving actually towards University Place, placing more trees. This is one of those streets that's slightly sort of dead-ended. And once you realize that, then you can start to sort of plant more shading trees so that people can actually spend more time in those areas. You can start to sort of take the programming that you had at Albee Square and also bring it into that part of the street, and make a kind of pedestrian connection between Albee Square to the university. Next. And just one final image. We're sort of at Juniors looking down towards Fulton.
No, at Barclays. You're right.
Barclays.
Barclays.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Claire?
Yeah, this is, I think, really important to point out, especially for all of you, for Julia and all the traffic people on the line. This is actually, you're looking at a speed table. This is in the capital project for the city to really improve the 4th Avenue to Hanson and Ashland connection for bikes. So it's really a mixing zone that right now is just all bollards and not all people. And so I think the idea of using the vocabulary that Kai's been talking about in capital projects that are in downtown Brooklyn was a really important part of this process, which is all these different kinds of, from builders pavement plans to capital initiatives, being able to kind of share a same set of goals and design language. You know, and someone asked about the yellow thing. This is a good point to talk about 80 Flatbush. There's actually, we show in the renderings a kind of shared color for, you know, planters, again, back to kind of putting some color in the landscape as opposed to making everything all black or all gray. But very much, you know, when Kai showed the project that's under construction, you're looking here at 80 Flatbush, which is Alloy, and the 80 Flatbush has a slightly different color palette, but uses the same detailing. So there's, your really developers will be able to, depending on what they're doing, shift, but the whole idea is low maintenance material. So whether it's Cortan or galvanized, or that it all kind of fits. Again, it's really about the geometry. Okay, next, and I might hand this back to you, Kai, for that final Bull Brooklyn, and Regina to talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, Regina, I think you should close, but I would just sort of say that what has been, I think, truly exciting on our part is to see how willing and it's been to actually work with the DPC and the city to move the sort of initial prototype projects forward. And so there's been a lot of dialogue back and forth already. And I think as people understand where and the hope of the vision plan, that it is actually adaptable and flexible, stakeholders can bring a lot of their own qualities to it, that it is something that is malleable. But Regina, why don't you finish?
Yeah, sure. And I want to make sure we have time to have conversation with our panelists, but just briefly to wrap up this presentation, we've also paid attention to our parks that really work so closely with our streets in downtown Brooklyn. And here's an image of Borough Hall and Columbus Park that really is meant to demonstrate that that space is so central and could be updated with more modern furnishings to serve more people. It already is a successful space for the Green Market and for events outside Borough Hall. But we really want to continue to advocate moving forward for a more modernized and more activated space here. So you could see enlarged fountains here and reuse in the space that is now currently devoted to parking at Gerolman and Adams. And then the next slide, Martha, shows this same space next. In winter, where we do think that there's space for temporary ice skating. And then lastly, focusing, no, go ahead. You can land on the last one, Martha. The University Place location right outside LIU is sort of in the center of Flatbush Avenue and has long been ignored virtually for 30 years with that famous upside down U outside of Long Island University. And we'd like to also see that park be upgraded and work with the Parks Department and possibly LIU on reimagining that space. And then the next slide, Martha. Shows another possibility for the same location with seating and play for the neighborhood. And so in conclusion, next slide. To wrap up before we go to the panel, what I'd like to say is that working with the community, working with our steering committee that included so many of our stakeholders, both residential, property owners, culturals, and schools, I think we've really come up with a plan to improve the public realm that, as you can see, because I think, and I've been looking at the comments, we all recognize downtown Brooklyn is a collection of places. It's not just one place centered on one park or one street. We have a really a significant challenge given how complex the street system is and how rooted it is in the past. And what we try to do using methods like the shared streets, like improved planting, like improved parks, is address all of them, not necessarily in all one way, but in one with one standard. And so I'm really proud of the work that we've done thus far with DOT. I saw that was another question that's been raised, because what we really like to do here is bring some of the attention that DOT has been placing with special places in Manhattan to Brooklyn, frankly. And we think that the core of downtown Brooklyn is prime for that street by street analysis. So we've worked with closely with our colleagues at DOT to make sure that we were hand in glove, so to speak, on how they're thinking about their toolbox and what we could advocate for in the future. So thus far, with DOT, we've had this positive experience of getting approvals at 11 Hoyt, getting the possibility of working on expanding Albee Square. You saw that with the Dime Savings Bank, working with the Capital Project at Hanson Place to improve bicycle safety, which would really upgrade the area along 4th and Atlantic, and then also working with Alloy. So wrapping this up, it's using those items as an action plan and growing that into an overall vision for the entire neighborhood. And I think with that, I'd like to turn it back over to our colleagues at UDF.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Regina, Claire, and Kai. Congrats on such an incredible and vibrant vision kind of for the neighborhood. We have a lot to dig into, obviously, especially what we've heard so far. I wanted to start maybe one or two questions, and then we'll invite our respondents on screen with us just shortly. We also want to make sure to include such terrific questions that are coming in from the chat. I see many Forum Fellows are joining us today, so we see you. Hello, everyone. Sorry we can't be in person. So maybe just with one question to start off with. I know this plan has been kind of a long time coming and many months in the works. When I think on the kind of the purpose of a vision plan like this, I think about the ways it can uncover and unlock things that have not felt doable before, maybe even prior to the pandemic. So either as an organization like Downtown Brooklyn Partnership or just a user in the neighborhood, what does this plan make possible that wasn't possible necessarily before?
Yeah, well, I'd say that the experience of the last 18 months, obviously we were all shattered, as all New Yorkers were, with the health crisis and what that did to our city. And then, of course, thinking about how all New Yorkers should be using our public realm. And the city, I think, took incredible strides with putting open streets and open restaurants out as citywide programs. And for us as an organization, we really locked arms with that and really looked hard at how they were looking at the street bed and their parks, and realized that we can do a lot more to serve our neighborhood. And so this was really an amazing opportunity. Just the idea that we're talking about shared streets and everyone knows what we're talking about probably wouldn't have been the case just 18 months ago.
So true.
And I think all New Yorkers now understand what our streets can add to our life outside in a way that was not, for better or worse, something that wasn't on people's radar prior to the health crisis. And I think for that reason, it gave all of us collectively, and Kai made that mention, what it's like to work with two different great design teams at once. It gave us really a renewed sense of purpose and a renewed partnership with city agencies and community members to really not just be reactive to what was happening because of the health crisis, but to be proactive about how we can plan for the future. And that's why I'm so proud to be presenting this work. That's why our colleagues at city agencies, I believe, have been working night and day through this time and have really really come up with phenomenal innovations. And I want to move that forward. That's why we're so happy to be here.
Maybe turning to Claire and Kai, in New York, it feels kind of incredibly important to honor each neighborhood's unique sense of place. I think it was one of you that mentioned downtown Brooklyn is a place of many places. How did you consider the particular nature and kind of fabric of downtown Brooklyn when building out kind of the design proposal for this plan?
Well, I think, again, it's a toolkit. So like if you take something like public art and how it works, what you really need is a framework, right? Whether it's access to power, space, having figured out stuff. And so in a sense, the program of furniture and the program of planting and the program of art can be completely different from one place to another, from one season to another. What the geometry of the curves and the shaping, again, there's like 2 or 3 different kinds of tree pits. Like you can pick a big circle, you can pick an aviator, you can pick a capsule. So it's not that there's only one thing. In a lot of streetscape plans, there's one thing, right? And you do the one thing over and over again. There's actually I call it an alphabet of things here, and you get to use it to play with. And so I think in how it gets deployed and the kinds of engagement, whether it's with business owners, whether it's with staff and Regina's organization, with its other collaborators that Regina is collaborating with, that's where you're going to see that voice. But this is a pretty, it has a lot of, consonants and vowels, this toolkit.
Yeah, and Guillermo, I think it's also true from all of our organizations, WXY, BIG, and the Downtown Brooklyn Partnership, that the majority of the people that work at BIG are actually living and inhabiting downtown Brooklyn or the adjacent neighborhoods. So there's a lot of actual experience that that the people who worked on this project actually took from their own, or they were listening to their colleagues' experience. And so I think there was a lot of knownness of what downtown Brooklyn has been kind of historically, and where it could go. And that's been really a super exciting kind of litmus test. I can't say that for, you know, all of the projects that we work on, because we don't live and eat and kind of play in the same way as we do in downtown Brooklyn.
Terrific. Well, thank you, three. I want to invite our respondents to join us on screen and kind of be included in the conversation. I'd love to welcome Julie and Siki to join us on screen. A quick intro for the both of them, and both fellows of the forum. Julie Day is director and team lead at Gell's New York City office. She has focused her experience on developing projects across design, policy, and advocacy to demonstrate streets as public spaces and engage people in the planning process. And we have Siki Zhu, zooming in from Boston. Siki is director of planning and delivery for Sidewalk Labs, where his work imagines how technology transforms the design and implementation of urban streets in the public realm. We're so terrific and happy to have the both of you join us in this conversation. So let's dig a little bit deeply into the plan and kind of open it up to the both of you. Julia, maybe we can start off with you. You've worked across numerous cities and with many city agencies on shaping more people-centered streets and public spaces, centering engagement and data as a crucial component in the design process. I'd love to open it up to you first to hear where you think are some of the potential windows of opportunity, maybe potential roadblocks to advance really such an impressive proposal for downtown Brooklyn.
Thanks, Guillermo, and thanks, Regina, Claire, and Kai. You know, part of where I honed my public realm thinking was working for Claire and her great team at WXY. So it's always nice to be reconnected and an honor to be on the panel with her and the others. And yeah, I love this plan. It's so exciting to see. I mean, I think just to step back for a second, you know, downtown Brooklyn is such a quintessential New York neighborhood, and for good and for bad, right? And I think it's one of those places that I think isn't always or hasn't traditionally been like top of mind where you want to go to maybe spend your free time, although that's changing and 200,000 plus people live and work there. But it's really a place you've passed through and where unpredictable things could happen. And I think that all made it kind of special, but that also led to challenges, right? Related to not knowing where you belonged if you're on your bike or you're trying to weave your way through one of the smaller streets. And a lot of that came from this area, at least the contemporary part of it, being so developed in a building first way or in a vehicle first way, as Claire alluded to, you know, the Moses era and these streets to funnel cars through. And what I love about this plan is that it really centers people in the vision and in the future. And it really looks to the kind of public life and that we want to see, and recognizes that we have to drive the infrastructure change with that centered. So that the infrastructure for people action, I love it. And I think that's going to reclaim space that for too long has been devoted to funneling cars through, or to just allowing, you know, buildings that didn't respond to the human scale to go up. And as Claire also mentioned, like, if, you know, it's kind of fundamentally, right, if we can't reclaim some space for people, it's going to be hard to implement some of these other initiatives. I must say a smaller one that I love is just that planting trees curbside and actually reclaiming some parking space for tree beds, which helps with our narrow sidewalk space too. I think, you know, something that I was thinking a lot about with this plan is, you know, as the actions are implemented, and so awesome to have a vision plan that actually has funding with it to implement. There's such opportunity to really measure the impacts on people, right, starting from day one. And I know that the partnership does a lot of collection of data and looks at where traffic volumes are. And so I think that's great. And I imagine there could be ways to build on that existing data collection to really understand how are some of these initiatives impacting public life, both in terms of the activities they're generating, but also how people feel there. What are the sentiments? How are those changing in terms of joy or sense of belonging in the neighborhood? And who's there, right? And who's taking advantage of these changes and who's not? And gathering that kind of information, starting from day one, will not only help to understand the impacts in the neighborhood, and it can inform potentially how design or program can be changed as this ever evolving neighborhood changes, and where we need to adapt and keep going for these permanent reclamations of streets for people, but at the same time do so in a way that can adapt to the changing nature of the city. And another thing that excites me about gathering the information on the impacts these changes can have is that we can then make the case for why neighborhoods across the city deserve such a high quality public realm like this one, and that safe places for people to walk and bike and spend time outside and have greater tree canopy are not just nice to haves and should not be exceptional, but actually should be the norm. And they should be implemented in neighborhoods that don't necessarily have bids and that might need more support for implementation or ongoing management, but are equally deserving of such high quality public realm. And I hope that plans like this, get in front of our future mayor, who is probably intimately familiar with it, given his experience in Brooklyn, and can help make the case for why prioritizing infrastructure for people is a key method to reducing inequality and making our city more physically and socially resilient. So I'll pass it back to you, Guillermo.
Thank you so much, Julia. Siki, maybe we can also kind of include you in the discussion. I know your work, you're really thinking closely about sometimes often competing stakeholders on the street, from small businesses to freight trucks to pedestrians. What parts of the plan really resonated with you the most, and what are some kind of potential challenges we might face, maybe more structurally, in order to kind of advance a vision like this forward?
Thank you, Guillermo, and thanks again to Regina, Claire, and Kai for inviting me. I love the plan. I thought the fact that we were able to combine a few really big, bold organizing ideas and some what I thought were really humane and considered sort of detailed design implementations was really, really compelling. I think, Guillermo, to your question, the sort of big opportunities and challenges, I think, Claire, you alluded to the fact that this is more than the vision plan. This is an action plan. This is a plan by which we're going to compel a lot of people to work in concert to make this thing happen. So it's almost like the actual hard work now starts of compelling the right people to be doing the right things at the right time. And I think building on Julia's comment, I think one of the things that will happen as we think about more richly programming the public realm is that it's going to create a new set of operational skill sets and responsibilities that currently doesn't necessarily exist, right? I mean, this is from my personal experience of thinking about innovations in streets. It's almost easier to build it than to find someone to be responsible for it. And just to, make this concrete, I think this idea that we would collect data to measure impact and tell stories about the success of these projects essentially creates a new responsibility for maintaining this data and a new skill set. So the question becomes, who's going to be doing that, and how do we sustain this kind of capacity and build upon it as this plan rolls out in the next 10 years? That's my big overarching question, but really it really sets my imagination in flight in terms of all of the additional things you can add to this great framework. that Claire and Kai created.
Well, I would say that one of the major points, selling points, for lack of a better term, is in our conversations with DOT, since the partnership through its bid structure is able to work with property owners and take on maintenance responsibilities in certain locations. And that it really gives us a significant leg up. I mean, we're invested in these blocks, block by block, and want to see all of them succeed. And maintenance and the long-lasting ideas are definitely things that we're invested in the long term.
Terrific. Well, thank you, Siki and Julia, for those terrific responses. So I have obviously a ton of questions, but I see a ton are flowing in through the chat. So we're going to jump into kind of a more moderated discussion. But again, we'll try to manage all these incredible questions and try to include them into the discussion. A lot of them overlapping, of course, but we really want to include you, of course, in this conversation. So I kind of wanted to start off with one particular question, particularly around kind of the role of pedestrian. I know a major focus of the plan is in the expansion of pedestrian space, obviously, and creating this shared street network. I think it was specifically north of Fulton Mall and the pedestrian core that you've highlighted in the presentation. How are you kind of reimagining traffic flow in these areas? I think in order to ensure safety for pedestrians in mind, I think safety and care is one lens that we're placing on the street, especially during the Streets Ahead series. So just kind of wanted to open it up to Claire or Kai, or especially Regina. And then, of course, throughout this conversation, I want to include Julie and Siki to kind of provide their expertise and thoughts in the discussion.
Well, I could try and jump in as a start just to frame. I see your question as where is the car in a lot of ways, right? Because we talked about all the other systems, but not in many ways. There's a couple of big factors. One of them I would say is congestion pricing, how what the next mayor will do in terms of placard parking. So some of this has to do with changing hearts and minds, but since you look at 14th Street and the Busway, right? It's a raging success because a couple of rules that are actually kept, you can get a serious ticket if you think you're gonna take your car in the wrong time, have affected everything else and people's behavior in a big way. So I feel like this plan goes a long way in making space and putting things in. So things like, and I'm going to throw the loading question, clean curbs, doing pilots for loading, having enough space to have freight bikes actually be able to share some space. Maybe even freight bikes can share, and sanitation vehicles could share some bus lane. Like there's a possibility that special vehicles can share bus lanes once you have a loop system in a way that you never let a car into, for example. But so I think before, in a way, there was no, I love music analogies, but there was no instrument to play in downtown Brooklyn, right? And I think what we tried hard to do is actually put something out there that enlightened leadership will actually be able to make even better. That's the thought here.
And also to answer another question that popped up, if we had any kind of traffic study done. So I just want to assure everyone that's listening that Sam Schwartz was basically thinking that you see the loop bus network, all of this was built on a traffic study throughout the downtown Brooklyn zone. And so the instruments, or at least what we hope the leadership will actually take further, is actually coming again from listening to a lot of different people that have experience of what the current traffic patterns are and where we could potentially see things going. And also Guillermo, to I'm so emboldened by the ability here in New York to kind of prototype ideas and to test ideas out. The bike lanes on the Brooklyn Bridge are an incredible example. Just, it was just a year ago or year and a half that the Van Allen Institute put out their Reimagining the Brooklyn Bridge competition to kind of think about this nearly 50-year-old structure and how it could be reimagined. And some of the ideas that were within that competition now see the fruition of actual. And that prototyping is a really important way for us to test out the ideas in the short term.
And the one thing I would add is just sort of a quip that I like to say. There is no traffic north of Fulton Street. Those roads don't go anywhere.
Right. Exactly. I love that. I mean, in a way, if any subway you walk out of, in downtown Brooklyn, barely have any room, people are already walking in the streets, okay, like everywhere. So this is really kind of creating a flow. In a lot of ways, if the flow is created, when you're dropping someone off by car or Uber, taxi, you're going to actually have an easier time of it because there will be kind of rules of the road and trees that in former parking spaces. Very few people are even allowed to park on the streets in downtown Brooklyn. It's a question of, people posted it, but really our attitude towards who should be parking there or not. There's a lot of parking spaces in buildings that people should be paying to park in if they want to pay, because those building owners would like to make money with people paying for parking.
And this has come up in the chat, so I saw it in a couple of people's comments. The fact is that we need enforcement of existing laws regarding placard parking, regarding the use of the J Street busway. And these are all things that we have been staunch supporters of the agencies enforcing. One of the reasons, in fact, that we're putting out this idea of a new bikeway and busway is that the cross streets, Fulton, Livingston, and Schermerhorn, are all used and needed to connect our communities. And there's a lot of abuse of the bikeway. I think that was mentioned as well. And these are things that we want to move forward, work with the enforcement agencies on to make sure they know that these are vital parts of our infrastructure.
Perfect. Thanks to the three of you. I want to also include one question in here that was earlier in the chat, and maybe it was kind of lost as the thread goes through, from Sam Frummer. If you can speak a little bit about the plan and how it accommodates trucking, loading, and goods movement, maybe more focused on freight. And I know, Siki, you might have kind of a couple comments on that as well, given your work. So I'll allow you to jump in afterwards.
Yeah, please.
I'll jump in really quickly, I guess. I think my preface here is that I'm personally not as familiar with truck movement in that particular part of the city. So I'd actually look to Claire to bring some on the ground expertise. I think generally speaking, yes, it's a big issue. It's something that in a lot of plans, this issue doesn't get considered a lot. It's not just goods loading and delivery in and out of buildings. It's also the fact that we have more and more e-commerce now, and the sidewalks are oftentimes the de facto staging ground for parcels and also for food handoff. So there's just a lot of these things happening. I suspect part of the solution here will begin with data collection, which I imagine the design teams have been looking at already. I think part of it might also involve some form of partnership or collaboration with tech platform companies in particular, right? I mean, they do have the ability to direct delivery to certain locations. And the fact that, I know at least in New York, in some places, bids have been working with Uber to designate pickup drop-off spaces to the periphery of pedestrianized zones. I think that's also a successful example. And then I think to the question of goods delivery in and out of buildings, that one becomes a bit trickier without kind of actually understanding what the buildings are and how they're set up relative to the street grid. So maybe Claire can speak to a little bit about that.
Yeah, I mean, first off, I want to say that, there's team at WXY who has done a lot with DOT and freight and loading studies and kind of how freight distribution could be localized and moved to e-vehicles. And Brooklyn is now getting the, that idea of electric charging and green loading zones is starting to be piloted in other parts of Brooklyn. Downtown Brooklyn is sort of the perfect place. And we didn't put it in this presentation, but there was a lot of work also with Sam Schwartz at identifying a kind of, I call it green loading zone, but you can call it clean curbs, or you can call it dedicated for really organized loading. So each block would have, no one else could park there. You can do loading. And that way you can also use that, like what we're seeing with Amazon and UPS, a transfer to other vehicles. Downtown Brooklyn has MetroTech. It has all these, it has actually more potential than any other place to actually have that kind of thing tech companies could bring to it, e-delivery, a kind of coordinated with a shared street plan. That takes probably data and a lot of, but because it's so mixed use, students, housing and office, you have huge pressures on loading at all times of day. And I think especially the small business owners, there's no really system for them to say when a truck should show up to unload, milk or whatever else. They are really subject to people showing up at any time. So that does take it puts a lot of pressure on, again, management of the street and having anyone who shouldn't be parking there, not parking there, because then you do have the space to actually do kind of actual loading zones.
Part answer to this question, but also a question in the chat that I really, really liked was if there was a plan for downtown Brooklyn at the night time. And I think that there are a lot of cities actually around the world that have actually sort of deputy mayors of the night that actually start to think about the programming and the use of streets and such, and even loading and unloading happening in kind of non-business hours as well, and how one could accommodate some of that as well. So I think that that is something that the plan could actually think about is and I think that partially we do in terms of the lighting and ensuring that safety does not only mean width of sidewalks and planters, but also that it's very well lit. And that when you walk through the downtown Brooklyn, that you again feel safe, and so that nighttime use programming, allowing for certain off-hour loading and unloading, I think that's another level that the plan could actually incorporate.
I want to ask one more question on logistics, and then maybe we can move into programming. Obviously, logistics is my favorite topic. One question here from Cindy McLaughlin, I think particularly around delivery and micromobility. So one of the growing trends in delivery and micromobility is wider footprints. E-cargo bikes often drag 4-foot platforms for cargo. The Dutch have new bike buses that allow multiple kids to bike side by side in tandem, etc. Will the width of the envisioned bike lanes kind of accommodate a future of many sizes and modes?
Well, that's I saw the picture that Cindy posted, and she got onto the topic that my partner is Adam's favorite topic, which is how are we going to get kids to bike to school? Like downtown Brooklyn, with all of its, would be the perfect place to actually get these little bike trains. And so it's not just logistics of stuff, it's also logistics of kids and drop-offs and everything else. And really, in terms of the width of bike lanes, obviously Brooklyn kind of pioneered the two-way bike lane, and you could see how that extra width of a two-way bike lane does give you some flexibility. At the same time, someone whizzing by on an e-bike is not the safest thing. And I think there's an opportunity to look at bus lanes and what I call it non-private car lanes as being more accommodating in the future. But that's a personal bias. And I think that we're all going to have to look at it. Downtown Brooklyn has a bunch of old fabric coming together. We kind of kept pointing that out, that there's only so much space. There's even these little lanes, alleyways. And so I think that when you have that many streets close together, and then only a number of streets that are going across, it's really the Willoughbys, the Fultons, the Livingston, Skirmahorn, those have to be really well managed. And then you could have a more kind of beautiful, looser system that is pedestrian oriented that connects them. I think that's sort of the ethos that Kaya and, Big and the WXY team brought to it, which is you got to get across and you got to make the getting across greener, clearer, and really have the space you need. And there is the space in those streets if you don't have two-way everywhere.
And this is what we've heard from the community. It's great when what you hear from the community actually comes together with what you hear from your designers, but we are continually hearing at the community board level and from community members how important and key east-west travel is, how dangerous it is in certain locations now, and how much it's needed for added connectivity for all kind of activities. So I think this is something that, and my hat's off really to Community Board 2, the Transportation Committee has been key in informing us on some of these items as well. I just want to let them know that.
I want to ask a question on public space programming. I have actually a couple of questions that I think a couple have kind of moved through. Maybe this one can be specifically for you, Regina. How are you thinking about programming so that they are lively and active spaces in the district, especially given there's such a rich culture ecosystem in and around the neighborhood? And then I'm happy to kind of welcome you, Julia, to kind of jump into the discussion as well and hear your thoughts on ways you've seen programs like these carried out successfully and the role of design of the public realm that can kind of play into that.
Yeah, well, I mean, downtown Brooklyn is really, we're sort of lucky, and we have a number of gathering places to program. Obviously, Albee Square, which is known citywide, is a great gathering location on Fulton Street. We also have plazas at Willoughby Plaza, adjacent to Adams Street. And on the west, we have Metrotech Commons, which is a gathering place, as well as the plaza at 300 Ashland. So we've been really lucky to be able to program a wide range of locations that really can activate the plazas, number one, and really add this great layer of what goes on in downtown Brooklyn to define what we're about. And the other thing about that is, as you mentioned, is that we encompass the cultural district. We have so many great cultural institutions that we consider a part of our neighborhood. So we have a very active programming calendar. It runs pretty much from early spring to just about Halloween and the holiday season to make sure that our spaces are activated. And my hat's off to my marketing and programming team. They do an amazing job bringing arts to these locations, bringing new projects that we've seen to really highlight, as well as family activities that are really centered on family and also on what feels good in a neighborhood. And I think that's one thing that we all in the programming side of our brains are say that is really important. But the other thing is, there's a yin and yang here. Sometimes, programming is an amazing part of our downtown, and I'm so proud that we have number one, we have the budget, and number two, we have great staff who are doing it. But the thing is, these spaces have to survive without programming too, and people still need to come to them when there isn't programming. And that, to me, is why you need safe spaces that are well lit, like Kai said, and spaces that are well designed and well maintained that people feel comfortable in. And I think that's a really big lesson that I learned at Brooklyn Bridge Park, is that spaces need to really operate, 24/7. And sometimes that depends on programming, and sometimes that depends on great life of the city.
Thanks, Regina. And welcome your thoughts as well, Julia.
Yeah, I agree with everything Regina said. I'll share that from some of the work we've done recently. We did a study of 7 public spaces across the country, not just in New York with the Knight Foundation, to see, what allowed them to really adapt and engage people throughout the pandemic in particular, and then, a little bit beyond. And programming was so key for that, and specifically spaces that had created, such strong relationships with the residents and communities around them, so that there could be resident-led programming and programming that could adapt and change based on the needs of the moment. So, programming that could pop up to meet kids and have activities for kids when they were having more downtime, or activities for new mothers. These are in different contexts in downtown Brooklyn spaces, but I think building those relationships with all the partners and institutions, as you already are doing, to allow for some of that resident-led programming to adapt and take shape too, is really important to creating inclusive spaces, and spaces that can really help people who maybe haven't seen themselves using these areas before feel welcome there.
Thanks, Julia. I want to include a question here that we have kind of on open space from Winston Von Engel. It would be great to expand your ideas for the large spaces at University Plaza and Columbus Park to Atlantic Center open space, and to coordinate with Metro Tech's open space design. Maybe these kind of talk about these open spaces around these major anchors in the neighborhood.
Yes, no, we agree. We work with each one of those spaces and really want to make sure they all are incorporated into the neighborhood. And I think Claire did say in the chat that we have done some work on connectivity from those spaces to the streetscape. But each, of course, has individual lifelines and stories. 2 of those spaces are Parks Department spaces, Columbus Park and University Plaza. And our goal for both of them are to make them amazing spaces for our neighborhood. They're incredible locations, especially University Place right on Flatbush Avenue. It's almost like the neighborhoods have grown around it. And now it's almost more prescient that the Parks Department has that location. And we would love to see that space modernized and used for not just Long Island University, but for the neighborhood at large. For me, an inspiration is how a space like the parks along Michigan Avenue in Chicago, where you are, Kai, function as both neighborhood and parks, and also parks that draw people. I mean, to me, that's what they can be. And the same thing with Columbus Park, which has this phenomenal location at the heart of our civic center. I just would love to see them more modernized and used by more people. Metro Tech Commons is now renamed by Brookfield as Brooklyn Commons. And we're really excited that Brookfield has been paying attention to that as one of the privately owned public spaces in Brooklyn. And we're really looking forward to partnership working with them on thinking about that as well.
Yeah, I think Atlantic Gateway, we called it that in the plan, and it's very, if you go into the detail of the plan, it's very much there. It's just absolutely key because it is the entrance into downtown Brooklyn, but it also is where a bunch of neighborhoods, including the cultural district, including, the edge of Cobble Hill, all of that, Flatbush, it all comes together. There is clearly if you look at all of the gathering of community, the protests, everything that was happening in that area, it's clear it's such an important space. And I think the plan did a lot of thinking about accessibility, about how the levels and and how the quality of the places you see in other parts of the plan right now could easily be brought into that plan. So what I would say about an action plan, as opposed to some master plan you put on the shelf, is everything that's kind of being presented is something that really that has been really taken through all of the different voices. And so different parts of downtown Brooklyn are going to come at that negotiation process at different moments in their development.
There. I have a question here, and maybe it might be the last one because it might open it up into some deeper discussion. Maybe specifically, and this is also kind of picking up on a question here from Eric Lawton. Maybe we'll start off with you, Regina. Since you're an independent local development corporation, how are you working with city agencies to move this plan kind of through the machinery? How are you thinking of the next administration and opportunities to work with the next mayor?
My first answer is working hard. I think that what we've seen in terms of success in New York City over the past decade is that business improvement districts and other community groups have really advocated for great change in New York City in terms of new plazas and new streetscape, and we'd like to do the same. The DOT Brooklyn office has been an incredible partner with us, working day to day on some pilot projects like a shared street on Willoughby, certainly supporting us on open restaurants and open streets. The same with the Parks Department and the City Planning Department, where their work comes together either on the parks or on new developments. Me and the staff here spend a lot of time making sure that we communicate and coordinate with city agencies and we hear them, and vice versa. And so there's a lot of collaboration. As Claire mentioned, there is one project already funded at Hanson and Ashland, which we are thrilled to be working on. And then, as Kai mentioned, we're also working with some of the private developers who are responsible to rebuild sidewalks on incorporating our plans into those. So those to us are really key, fundamental, early moments for getting things in the ground to prove, frankly, proof of concept. That's why I think this is different and a different way of going about planning, as both Claire and Kai have mentioned. What we'd like to do moving forward is work with the new administration, the new borough president, and new elected officials on getting some of the larger projects fully funded as capital projects. I think to me, seeing the success over the Brooklyn Bridge in terms of the bikeway really points to looking at the full length of Adams Street as a greenway going to the bridge. And it will have a huge impact on Adams Street going to Geralman Street. And for us, that's certainly a priority. Also, you saw the sidewalk construction pictures that Kai showed you. We think that those kind of improvements to our tree pits, in addition of trees, in addition of streetscape, can be impactful through the entire core of downtown Brooklyn. And we stand ready to work with our city agencies to implement that, both with private projects as well as with public money and bid money, if we can figure that out. And then there's larger projects like the rebuilding of the parks that certainly we are ready to advocate for new dollars. So there's a lot of answers there.
Well, I know we're at time, but I want to ask one last question, maybe to all our panelists and speakers. What's the one big request, one big desire? I know you've listed them, Regina. I want to open it up for the rest, that you think the next administration should lead in order to create more people-centered streets. I'll poke at, maybe start with you, Siki, Julia, Kai, and then end with Claire, and then we'll wrap today's event.
I guess I have a sort of slightly left field idea, just building on the notion that there could be a productive relationship with the city. I'm actually curious, just walking around the city and looking at how COVID testing and vaccination's been has made itself felt on New York City streetscape,
Hmm.
whether there are ways in which sort of the municipal infrastructure of the city of New York could actually show up in interesting ways in the future streets of downtown Brooklyn, right? I mean, streets are a huge municipal asset. It's sort of this one interface people have with the city. What are ways in which we can bring some of those services out into the public realm? And my personal pet horse has always been library trucks, but that's just my own, bias.
I love library trucks.
And maybe, sorry, the question, Julia, was what's the big kind of request or big desire that you'd love to see from the next administration for centering people in our streets?
Yeah, yeah, and love what Siki just said, and I think one, it would fundamentally be valuing public spaces, open spaces, streets, and transit included as a key part of making our city more equitable and sustainable. And I think, sometimes it feels there's a disconnect between why high quality public space is actually important to addressing some of the social issues that are front and center. And I think really seeing it as a key part of the equation is important. And we've seen that happening more and more with parks. And as Regina and the other panelists said, through the pandemic showed how vital our streets are, our neighborhood streets are too. So just to continue to build on that momentum for seeing streets as important to quality of life. And more specifically, I'd love for us to get more creative about where play can happen in the city. And I see it in the downtown Brooklyn plan, lots of playful features. And I think there are opportunities to intersperse play into more shared streets and open streets and to wide sidewalks, to have those features help lead you into parks that maybe have not been as well used as they could be. But of course, having more of that infrastructure throughout the city means we need someone to help manage it and maintain it too. And so also finding the resources that allow the city to innovate with streetscape design and take on maybe some maintenance that's a little bit out of the box will also be important.
Thanks, Julia. Any more kind of final thoughts, Kai or Claire, to round out our discussion today?
Yeah, I would say that I'm, again, coming at this a little bit from experiences in Copenhagen with the bike infrastructure and the superhighways and the many ways of getting through a city in a sort of safer and more nuanced way. And that we also have an office in Barcelona where they're currently kind of remapping the superblocks into sort of prioritized pedestrian versus vehicular. And so coming from those examples, I think that the shared street idea for Brooklyn, downtown Brooklyn, is something that could really start to be a litmus test for those other neighborhoods that Julia was also kind of mentioning, and hoping that what we actually do right here in the heart of Brooklyn is something that could have reverberations for generations in the outer lying parts of Brooklyn and the outer boroughs. So I see that potential, and that's the bold Brooklyn that I'd love to live in the future.
So I'll end up with the kind of getting back to what Julia said, where it struck her that the infrastructure for people is the real story behind this. And I really agree. And to that end, the big request is giant capital project because downtown Brooklyn serves so many people. And this actually is worthy, after all of these years and a rezoning, to kind of prove that a traditional kind of monolithic streetscape is not the only way to bring kind of that. So like that combination of public health benefits, its environmental benefits, managing traffics, having kind of an interface with tech and data would be possible if there was an actual commitment to actually upgrade from the Brooklyn Bridge to Atlantic Avenue to downtown we need today. So I think that's an easy move. Infrastructure for people demonstrated in downtown Brooklyn. Put the, you've rezoned this much stuff, and Regina was responsible for that. Now you have to bring it to the streets, like it, absolutely. So that's what I would ask for.
I certainly agree. And I think that it's warranted. And I really hope that, New York City prioritizes Brooklyn, fingers crossed, in a way that some of the innovation in terms of people-centered infrastructure can work. And I think, I'm so proud of the work that we've done together as a team with a lot of input, and how I'm hopeful that it'll move forward.
Terrific. Well, I want to thank our three presenters today for sharing such an incredible, vibrant, and ambitious plan. I want to thank our respondents for joining this discussion and our guests for sticking around an extra 6 minutes and joining us today. To learn more about the plan, you can visit Downtown Brooklyn Partnership's website. We'll plug a link in the chat just shortly. We have many great events coming up at the Urban Design Forum, so stay tuned, including an upcoming presentation from Soho Broadway Initiative's Public Realm Plan on October 29th. We'll plug that link into the chat so you can join and listen in. Again, we want to thank our fellows, our board of directors, and our director circle again for their support. And stay tuned for more in the upcoming months around our Streets Ahead series. If you have projects or plans you would like to discuss and share, please reach out to us at the forum. Thank you again, and have a great rest of your afternoon. Thanks all.